So up next, we've got Mike and Johnny from Hotels.com. Johnny is currently a product analyst focused on app and landing page testing and optimization. Mike is a senior mobile product marketing manager where he helps propel mobile apps to a key revenue generating platform and to pioneer innovate commercial approaches to solve customer problems. These guys have come all the way from London, so if we could please give it up for Johnny and Mike. Thank you.
Yeah, that's us. Where are you going to stand, Johnny?
Yeah, I'll go stand there.
All right. So we are from Hotels.com. Raise of hands, how many people have used Hotels.com? So some of you. Okay, quite a few. Now, even better question, how many people have used the Hotels.com app? A few. Okay, a lot less. That's a little disappointing for me, but so we're here to talk about kind of more testing in general, how Hotels.com tests, the kind of the what's, the how's, how we do it. And like we were introduced, I'm on the product management team, and I look after experimentation in iOS and Android apps. And this wonderful guy here is on the Hotels.com product analytics experimentation team. And he's quite a superstar, so that's great. So hopefully between the two of us, we can give you guys some insights into how we work, but also maybe something you can take back home with you at the end of the presentation. So let's get started. Testing isn't new for Hotels.com. On our desktop and mobile website, we've been testing for roughly about 10 years now. So we've kind of got that process down. We test in 80 countries. Not as impressive as maybe Netflix or Airbnb. We run about 500 tests a year, which for us is great. And it's good now that we're doing this on apps as well. We have, with that desktop and now apps, we have a really kind of robust set of tools, teams, and an overall culture. I'll come into culture in a little bit later, but what we like to say is we test everything. Now, that's not probably 100% true, but more or less anything you see on the desktop or on our apps has been tested in some form or function. So, but what about apps specifically? That's why we're here today, all of us, is testing in apps. We had a problem about 2 years ago. We didn't test in apps. We had no way to do it. We had no infrastructure at all. We would once in a while take learnings from mobile web or from desktop and try to replicate it into the apps, but it wasn't good enough for us. When we had this, again, 10-year-old, kind of really robust, tried and tested program, we needed to have something in the apps. And it was a little bit of a long process, but long story short, we went with Optimize, and it's been really great for us because now we're finally testing in apps, just like we do across all our other platforms, and it's been really nice for us. Now, one of the main reasons we decided on Optimize was we have data behind everything we do in the business. Unsurprisingly, we're a very data-driven company, and Optimize really helps us to get the data from the tests into our data systems, especially into our kind of real-time test tools that we have that give us that ability to really spit out that information that the test managers, that the product managers can look at in quasi real time, every couple of days to see how those tests are going and if they need to be called, if we need to get rid of them because they're actually hurting conversion, or if we just need to see how they're performing, how they're doing. So that's a little bit about Hotels.com and how we work, but why should you guys test? If you don't already test, why should you, really? And when we sat down all those years ago, we came out with kind of 5 main key things that you can use to sell to your management teams or to whoever would give you investment to run a testing program. So I'll go through each one of those a little bit. Manage risk. It's kind of self-explanatory, but if you decide to run a test of a new feature, you know the result once that test is concluded. If it's something that either positive or negative, and if it's something you want to run out or not. So it really kind of mitigates any kind of huge problems you would have if you put something live and conversion goes way down. So managing risk is a really good kind of way to sell that to the business. Return on investment, similar thing. You can kind of have real time, or at least real data to see what value those tests or those features are going to drive once you do make them live. So really, really good to have that. Competition is a little bit more fun one, and competition is kind of what we do is put the different site sections or different pods or pillars within the different platforms and let them compete with each other. So we have guys that, you want to have the biggest tests, you want to have the best outcome from these tests. So it kind of focuses their thinking and really kind of helps to build that little bit of culture of we like to test because we can also kind of brag a little bit at the end. This is my test one. Prioritization, and I'll come on to prioritization a little bit more in a few minutes. But what that is essentially the more tests you run, the better you get at prioritizing the tests that end up winning or that give you what the learning objectives that you're really looking for. And finally, knowledge building. Knowledge building is more or less, it's the business learning about the customer. It's the business learning what features they're actually looking for. And that goes across all the different parts of the business, not just your experimentation teams or your product teams. It really is good for the whole business to know what's working and what's not and where they should be focusing their time moving forward. So, like I said, I wanted to move on to prioritization, road mapping. There's lots of tests. So basically we solicit tests from every part of the business. That's marketing, that's management. Everyone can submit an idea, but that also gives us, thousands and thousands of tests in our backlog. A lot of them aren't good. In fact, a lot of them are probably terrible. But we have to have a way to determine which ones we want to make live and when. So what we do is we kind of have a prioritization meeting every 2 weeks, and that's UX. So our design guys, that's us product, that's analytics and experimentation team, that's engineering. We all sit down and we basically discuss all that backlog of tests we have and what we want to do next. So that is a really kind of good way to start seeing which test you want to run and at what time. Then the next week, the week after that prioritization meeting, what we'll do is we'll have kind of more a road mapping session. And that's more product focused, dev focused, but we sit and we say, okay, we've prioritized these tests and we want to get these in this part of the roadmap. So then we kind of curve out in the roadmap a certain amount of time for a certain amount of tests every so often. So that really kind of helps us to keep that backlog down a little bit. So it's a really kind of great process for us. Now, one question that comes from that, though, is how do you actually prioritize a test? For us, we have a little bit of a problem in our traffic and getting a huge volume of people using the app as a regular basis. I think one of the guys this morning said, we're the type of app that you come to once or twice a year. It's not one that you're in every day, just like Facebook or Twitter or anything like that. You're not coming every day. So it's harder for people to come in and be put into tests very often. So we have a metric we call, not really a metric, it's more kind of a process we call impact. And that's the number of people who are going to see that test. So we try to focus on the parts of the app, the pages of the app or the sections that are going to get the most volume, the most people to see that. Then we also times that, let's say, by the effort required, not just dev effort or development time, but also, is it going to take a long time to design for UX? What is the actual effort required? And then we also times that a little bit more by something we call big and bold tests. So we want to do tests that are really going to drive drive incremental value to the business. We do, obviously, optimizations and smaller tests, but Johnny's going to go into that a little bit more in a few minutes. But that's kind of how we do that. So talking a little bit more about impact is, there's so many considerations. So we have that thing that we talked about, which is, how many people are going to see it, what's the effort required, and is it a big, bold test? And there's a lot of data that also helps with that. So we kind of do predictive analytics at some point. We have user research. We have other people from around the business helping, giving us even more data. So that's great. One example that came out of that is we've just started doing onboarding. So Hotels.com app, until very recently, never did onboarding screens. It was a tough sell. Not a lot of people wanted it, but end of the day, it really paid off for us. The most specific I could be is it was 4 times the average conversion rate uplift. So it really did work for us. And so you'll see that now coming pretty soon across all of our apps. So now I'm going to hand over to Johnny for a little bit, and he's going to take us through the actual process of how we test at Hotels.com.
Cool, thanks, Mike. Yeah, as I said, I'm going to talk you through the testing process that we use at Hotels.com, and I want to share with you 3 things that we've learned about this process over the 10 years of testing. So 2 of these things we've learned from our pretty extensive web testing program, and we've now been able to apply to what we do on the app. And the other one of these we've learned from our relatively young app testing program, which we now apply to what we do on the web. Before I get into that, I just want to have a quick spin through the testing cycle that we use at Hotels.com. Now, I know a number of speakers earlier today have touched on quite a similar cycle that they use here, so I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time on it, but I'm just going to cover over the basics. So, if you want to do some testing, you've obviously got to start with an idea. So, up on this microscope phase, actually. Here at Hotels.com, we like to take a very data-driven approach when coming up with test ideas. So for this, we'll look at inputs such as previous test results, also a lot of customer behavior data, and we'll try and build tests from there. We also take into account a few more qualitative inputs. So these will be things like internal feedback, user studies, and things like App Store reviews. So once we've got all of these inputs, we then move on to the impact phase, where we decide which ones are going to be prioritized. Once these are prioritized, it goes to the development. So we work with designers and developers to build the actual code that's going to go into the test. Once that's ready, we go to the launch phase, where we launch the test. We also do a few things during this time while we're waiting to get an adequate sample size, and I'm going to touch on that in a moment. Once we've got an adequate sample size, we've obviously got to make a decision. Do we roll out the variant, or do we stick with the control? Pretty simple, but there's a few other nuances that we like to do here. Again, I'm going to touch on in a moment. Following that, for every test we do, we want to get a better understanding of what our tests tell us about our testing in general at an aggregate level. So for each test, we gather a huge amount of metadata. We can then analyze which sort of test themes are driving conversion and looking promising, and which aren't really paying their way. This then feeds back into the original data-driven insights process, and then generates more test ideas, therefore completing the cycle. So for the 3 things that we've learned about this process, I'm going to first talk about the launch phase, but then touch on the decision phase before looking broadly at the whole ideas generating process. After that, I'm just going to talk very quickly about 2 future initiatives that we're looking pretty promising, quite exciting, that we're hoping to bring to this testing cycle in the not too distant future. Great, so you've done your test, data-driven test idea gathering. You've built the test, and you've launched it. It's day 1. The product manager's really excited. They want to understand the customer better. They want to move the needle. They want to get some new ideas. Also, as it happens, they're meeting with the leadership team a little bit later on, and they would really like to share some numbers. Obviously, as any of you know who've done a bit of A/B testing before, you can't really do this at this stage. You've got to wait until the final day before you can make any inferences about the outcome of the test. However, just because you can't decide on what the outcome is going to be, that doesn't mean you can't look at how the test is doing. And you should, because I'm sure a lot of people in this room know if you do enough A/B testing, things are going to go wrong. What do we mean about things going wrong in an A/B test? So this might, for a lot of you, bring up ideas of a variant causing the app to crash, or maybe throwing errors, or often maybe something just being a really terrible idea. And these things do happen, but things can also go wrong in a slightly more subtle way, a slightly bit more behind the scenes. And when it does, you really want to know about it. The problem with these sort of things is they can often be kind of a bit unintuitive and maybe not that discoverable. However, they can invalidate your results. We started finding this when we started doing a lot of performance testing on our web pages. Essentially, one of the things we found here is if we created a variant that increased the page load significantly compared to the control, the process of getting people assigned to the test would mean that the faster variant would capture more traffic that was otherwise bouncing. So maybe some bot traffic or just headless browsers that would get in there as well. The effect this had would it would make the faster variant look like it was performing extremely poorly in terms of conversion because it was capturing more of this bad traffic. This would make it look like we might have to turn the test off early and we'd get a terrible result from what was actually a faster variant. However, once you compensate for this and adjust the distributions to make it 50-50 again, the faster variant was actually working really well in terms of conversion. So following this, we took a whole flight of data quality checks that run twice daily across both our web and our app testing program, and they look for any changes like this. There's a few other things that we do for that as well. This means that once you get to the final sample size, you can really trust the data and go in and make the right decision. Okay, so you've been monitoring your test data, and you finally reached the decision day. Are you going to stick with the control, or are you going to roll out the variant? So often determining the better one is a pretty simple process, right? You've got two groups, which one performed better in the KPI or KPIs that you're trying to optimize. And ultimately, the purpose of the test is just to do that. However, the purpose of a really great testing program should be to answer many more questions than this. What we try and do at Hotels.com is for every test we do, even if it's inconclusive, or maybe especially if it's inconclusive or negative, we want to really understand why that didn't work. So this often means taking quite a long time to dig into the customer behavior data. This is something we've learned time and time again from our web testing app program, and now we've been able to take to our app. And what we found is by doing this process, inconclusive or negative tests, if you understand them correctly, can lead to much bigger and more frequent wins. So an example of how we've done this on the app recently is on our Android device. We were trying to test a feature, it's quite a big feature called Trip Planner. A trip planner essentially allows you to go and star hotels that you're interested in, and then you can go to a trip planner page where you can later compare them, whittle them down to the final one. The top level, once this test was complete, was completely flat. Super disappointing, a lot of effort gone into building that as a big feature. However, once you dug into it a little more, we found that one segment of customers was performing extremely well and one a lot worse. At first, we thought that the performing worse ones, it was because it had a greater mix of people who are buying hotels the same day. So maybe a feature like this, it's just getting in the way. They just want to go find a hotel, book it because they want to stay there tonight. However, when we looked into it a little bit more, we found that between these two groups, they were actually interacting with the starring hotel feature about the same amount. However, the group that was performing quite poorly was never actually finding the page where they were on. So, knowing this, we were able to build an iteration of this test, which has a sort of animations that make it really intuitive to see where that's going. That's just launched a few days ago, and we're hoping, especially in the analytics department, that that's going to be a big win. So by nurturing this attitude to your testing, you can find that your inconclusive or your negative tests can be just as beneficial to progress as your positive ones. Okay, so you've been monitoring your data quality, your test finished, you've reflected on the findings. What do you do next? Well, you can build more tests. And often, as I said, we collect about 100 metadata points for every test we complete, and this then feeds back into that process of deciding what we test next. And this works well, and then how do we improve on that? Well, we just do it more, we just do it faster, and we assign a lot of targets as to how many tests we want to do. And this is fine. However, what we found with our web testing program is this has led to a lot more iterations rather than ideas. By this we mean we get a huge target of how many tests we want to do, and so we just end up doing quite small changes to text or color or subtle changes to functionality. And what this has done, and a couple of people have mentioned this earlier, has really led to some serious diminishing returns on our web and app testing program. huge amounts of inconclusive tests. However, we had a slightly different approach with the app where we've been a bit more flexible with the targets, and this has led to us to have more time to pursue bigger, bolder, more dramatic changes. So an example of this, because we had a little bit more time on this, we were able to do a complete strip down and redesign of our hotel details page for our iOS devices. Having a bit of this time led to a lot more design process going into it, a lot more thought, and that's led to one of the biggest wins we've had across all the platforms in the last 2 years. So this was something that we did on our app testing program and has really informed the web teams. So that's our testing process at Hotels.com, and 3 things we've learned in the last 10 years. Just to recap, that's making sure that we have excellent data quality throughout the duration of the test. That's making sure that we don't just understand the controller variant, but we try and understand the customer a lot better with every test that we do. And then also how we try and allow a little more wiggle room so we don't just get iterations, but we also can focus on big ideas. But what's next for the Hotels.com testing process? Well, remember I spoke about these tiny iteration tests where it's maybe like little bits of copy, like little V1 headers that are getting changed. What if there was a way where we could have these tests running continuously and they were constantly automatically picking the best variants with minimal to no human interaction? So that's something that we're hoping using multi-arm bandit algorithms in our testing program is going to bring us in the next year or 2. If you also remember, I talked about all this metadata that we collect on all of our tests. What if we could leverage this data so that we can call tests quicker and with more confidence and have a better understanding of the relative risk involved? This is something we've been evaluating by moving from a frequentist to a Bayesian approach when calling tests, and that's something we're hoping, again, to bring into the next couple of years. That's all for me. I'm going to hand back to Mike. Thanks.
Cool. So thanks, Johnny. Like I said earlier, I wanted to just finish off with a little note about culture. We really are a test everything culture, and it goes throughout the entire business. Everyone believes in testing, and they will give ideas. We'll get ideas through user research. We'll get ideas from what we call dog fooding, which is eating your own dog food. Testing the apps, testing the site, and feeding back to the product team what you don't like. But more importantly is something we started a few years ago called testathons. And testathon, kind of easy to work out, is essentially a hackathon for tests. So 1 or 2 days where you sit down around a theme or around a pod. So let's say the ones I look after are either iOS or Android, and you take 1 or 2 days and you either try to get as many tests out as you can, or you try to get the biggest, boldest test ideas out there as quickly as possible. Now, obviously, since we are apps and we're dependent on app releases, it's not going to happen overnight. But it's a really fun kind of team building way to get people even more excited about testing. It gets them out of the day-to-day. They don't have to sit at their desks. They can go to a different part of the building, or sometimes we get a hotel close to the office, but at least gets them out, and it kind of makes everyone feel a little bit different and special. So testathons have really, really worked well for us. So I just wanted to mention that, and hopefully that's a tip that you guys can take back with you. Now, before we completely finish, maybe a fun, non-scientific test is, I'm an American, but I've lived in London for 10 years, and the last slide is a joke. I've been told it's not going to work. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tell you the joke, and you tell me if you think it's funny or not. And I might actually win some money out of this, so just say it's funny. So thank you. If you liked the presentation, we're Johnny, we're Mike. If you didn't like the presentation, we're Penn and Teller. So that's it. Yeah. I guess that works. Yeah, that's a yes then? It works. No. Okay. That's a no? Oh, okay. Did you bet against me? All right.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
It's no latte joke, but it's still good. We have got a couple of minutes, and we do have a couple of questions that came in. So, there's a couple kind of around how the organization works with testing at hotels.com. And one thing is, how do you share your experimentation kind of wins, losses, general findings? How is that reported to the business team on a whole?
So we have basically we're set up in pods, which means we have kind of a landing, shopping, checkout, and apps pod across the business. Weekly basis, the experimentational team will come in and have a meeting with us and go through the results of all the tests that had been called in the last couple of weeks. So some weeks there are nothing to call, but usually there is at least 1 or 2 tests that we sit down and we discuss the results. And then we decide from that, is it something that we roll back to control? Is it something we push 100% live to all platforms? Or is it something that we need to kind of retest in a different way? Because maybe the test setup wasn't exactly the way it should have been.
I guess in addition to that as well, similar to I guess the Netflix approach, once that decision has been made, if it's something big like a strategic test or if it's just being rolled out, we'll then send out an email with all the associated the data and everything to go through that will go to probably about like 300-400 people, including like all the key stakeholders and leadership team. And often if they've got particular issues, either just through general company strategy that it goes against, or if they've thought of something wrong with your test design or numbers, they're going to come back to you, and sometimes in a very public forum. So there's that extra level of scrutiny there.
And we do have, obviously, a kind of monthly all product and experimentation team meetings that we do go through a lot of those tests of other pods, so not just the one that you might be on, but you get to see all the results from everyone else as well.
Okay, and that kind of feeds into another one that we had. Do you guys ever encounter, like you said, you broadcast this to the whole company. Do you ever encounter any issues like Netflix brought up the HIPAA issues?
Yeah.
So with the highest paid person's opinion, does that ever get in the way? Is that a challenge you sometimes face?
You want to start, or?
Yeah, I mean, I would say not especially. I think if someone's got a clear hypothesis and they've demonstrated it with solid data, people don't come against it in purely like a personal preference or something like that. We do occasionally will have like a strategic incentive where if something runs completely parallel to that, or we want to make sacrifices in one area and not the other. So like a good example of that is if we want to harm mobile web conversion in order to send people to our app, sometimes there can be contentious issues around that. But by and large, like what's said in the deck and what's discussed in the meeting will be what happens.
And I think it also, just to add a little bit on that, is since we have been testing so long, it's more like the hippo has not lost its voice, but they know that any idea that you're going to have is going to need to be tested first.
It's got to be vetted.
It's going to be vetted. It's got to be tested. You got to have a really strong hypothesis, and we're going to test that. So it's not like I just want this.
Yeah.
So that kind of, they have to think about it a little bit before they will actually go and try to kind of tell everyone to do it.
Cool. Okay, guys. Well, that takes us to time for today as well. Perfect. So appreciate it. Thank you guys.
Very much.
Thank you guys. Give another round of applause, guys.